Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Paranormal Karen, funny too. Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Oh, and did I mention she's funny too? Yeah, cha-cha-cha.
Hey everybody, welcome to my very first podcast. My name is Paranormal Karen, karenrontowski.com, and thanks for tuning in. Some of you may know me from my other podcast called Karen and Kira Can Read, where myself and the hysterically brilliant Kira Sultanovich do psychic readings and tarot readings for other comedians. Some of you may know me from my stand-up career of over 25 years, or some of you may be friends and paranormal investigators, which I've been doing, I would say, 15 to 20 years. So that's a little bit about who I am. If you don't know, I make most of my living doing stand-up. I have special shows where I do tarot from the stage. That's my day job, reading tarot cards. I have two wonderful jobs with no bosses. That is terrific. I am not a skeptic. Okay? And I want to say, to enjoy this podcast, sometimes you're just going to have to throw your skepticism out the door and laugh and giggle, but just go along. I'm sure I'll have many skeptics on as guests, but I have seen a lot of things and I am more open. I have some crazy stories you'll hear throughout. I have a very funny story about a spirit attachment that I have that I'm going to tape the comedy version of it when I'm working at the Australia Paracon this year. And I will have that for you live. So this show is really going to be a mixture of my travels, what I'm doing ghost hunting. I'll have a lot of guests on. For years, people have told me I should do a podcast. And I was like, oh, I can't do a podcast. And then my ego went somewhere from there to, hey, I can do a podcast alone. So I don't know when that happened. But some of these episodes will be just me chattering away. And some will be my wonderful guests and friends. I also have, let me give you the whole sort of marketing spiel. You can find out everything about me at karenrontowski.com. You can find my web series, Paranormal Karen, where I do these little 1-minute comedy pieces on the haunted places that I've gone. You can book a tarot reading at that same site. That's what I do during the day. Or you can check out my comedy calendar. So there's a little bit of everything that I do that is all going to be mixed into this podcast. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about how I got started. So, I was doing this podcast with Kara, called Karen and Kira Can Read, and having a wonderful time. And we found our producer, Mike Flynn. And as we're doing the tarot podcast, that's what I'm going to refer to it as, I suddenly got the bug. I was like, hey, this is it. This is what I need to be in on. This is where I find my crowd. This is where I find people I want to interview and get it all going. And I am a Leo with Gemini rising, which means I am fire and air. And when I get an idea, just move out of the way. I am burning down a forest. There is no way you can stop me. And I came into our other podcast going, it's going to be like this, and I'm going to do this, and this is going to happen, and da-da-da-da-da-da. After we finished taping our other podcast, I noticed that Mike was standing there very quietly. And he looked at me, and he said, could I make a few suggestions about your podcast? And right away, I was like, this is the guy to work with, because this is, he's a Pisces, and he was very patient, and he knew instinctively that once that fire was burning, if he stood there and said, let me help you out, here's an idea, he would have just been ashes. So he stood there in the creek and waited for me to burn out my fire, and made a whole bunch of wonderful suggestions. So there you're going to hear me be talking to producer Mike through this whole thing. So there was the first part of putting the podcast together. Now, when I looked around at the people I'm surrounded with and my friends, I guess I don't have the usual friends that you do. I don't know if you have an animal communicator or a demonologist or anyone like that in your life, but these are my favorite people. I'm going to start with one of my Bettys. That's what I call my best friends because I have too many. I can't have one best friend. My Bettys. My first Betty that I talk to every morning is my friend Sonia King, who has a fabulous podcast and is a fabulous speaker. Her podcast is called Josh Has Autism. She talks about her son that has autism, but she is also an animal communicator that I met many, many years ago when my little dog Courage became sick. She lived in Pennsylvania. She's now in Florida. And a friend of mine said, you got to talk to Sonia. My dog had been getting very ill. I couldn't find anyone. The vets didn't know what was going on. We lived in this very, very haunted house. Let's step back. We lived in a guest house, which was incredibly haunted. And this was prior to really getting out and investigating. But some of the things that happened in the house, I would wake up in the morning and there'd be scratching under the bed. And I turned on the light, look under the bed. There's nothing under the bed. I go outside. The whole guest house is built on a cement platform, so it's not like there's an animal under there or anything like that. Go back to bed, and then sure enough, 5 minutes later, now this scratching is on the roof. Okay, a friend of mine came over. She said, hey, your house is on a ley line. That is why there is so much energy, and there's a vortex dropping all kinds of things into your yard and into your neighborhood. At that point, I was more curious. I have learned to be safer with my investigations and with where I live. I no longer investigate or tolerate any of that in my apartment or any place that I will live. So then one day I was meditating and I saw something come by me on the left. I looked out of the corner of my eye, and what it was a dark kind of a mist, but it had a shape like the character Despicable Me. How he has the hunched back, and then there was like a pointy nose, but the nose and the head were very much lower than the hump on the back. And I caught this thing out of the corner of my eye, and I saw the nose turn towards me, and it disappeared just like that, almost like it saw that I had seen it, and it was gone. About a week later, I had a friend over, and while we were sitting in the sort of desk area, it was very small, kind of had everything in one place, he all of a sudden started going, what's going on with your light? And I had one of those lights that has, you pull on it up on the ceiling, you give it 2 tugs, and then the light goes on, 1, 2, 3. And the little string that you tug on was spinning, like just wouldn't stop spinning. And I was like, I guess that's a ghost. I don't know. About 2 weeks later, my dog got so sick. My little Courage, he's 8 pounds. He was probably 5 years old at that time. He got so sick. The vets could not figure out what was wrong with him. He couldn't walk right. He wasn't eating. He would just go under the bed and stay there. So someone said, you have to call this animal communicator who's also a stand-up comedian. So I call my friend's she wasn't my friend at this time. I call Sonia, and she says, I'm only going to tell you this because you're into ghost hunting and you're a Reiki master and you do all these things, but there's a dark entity in your house that is bothering Courage, and you need to do a Reiki cleanse before it really makes him ill to the point of no return. And I got up and I cleansed the whole house, and in seconds, the dog came out from under the bed, full health, just no stagger, no like tail wagging, ready to eat, ready to go for a walk, ready to start again. I became so fascinated, and she became so connected to my dog that we talk all the time. And my dog has quite an attitude. She calls my dog the boss because he's very bossy. And she says he's very spiritually connected. In fact, you will hear, some of you may have heard, we took him ghost hunting in Kira's house. Kira had an entity in her house, and we brought Courage through, and Courage told Sonia what was there, and it made for a very, very interesting episode. But we actually have hysterical times with Courage. One time I changed his food, and he would not eat, and Sonia called me to say, Courage said, you used to have little triangles in his dish, and now there are little squares, and he will not be eating the little squares. I apologize about the traffic behind me. It's a low budget. It's in my house, so we may have a truck or a police going by. So my dog would not eat the food until I took the squares out. And to this day, we're still eating triangles, or he is. I guess I'm not. At one point, he was sick. And I called her to say, what's wrong? And she said, well, he says he just had a stomach ache because he ate some old Chinese food off the street, and that he, even though he feels sick, it was very good, and he's going to do it again. I have a million stories about Courage. One night I was at a show, and I said to someone, can you hold the dog? And the next morning there was a text message from Sonia that said, this just in. The boss will no longer be referred to as the dog. So that is my best friend, one of my Bettys, and we laugh and laugh every day, and she communicates with Courage. So you're going to hear a lot about Courage and my animal communicator friend. Second, another one of my Bettys, I'm sure I'm going to have a full episode very soon with Terry Huberman, who is my paranormal consultation partner. We go try to help people when they have trouble in their house. She is a medium amongst many other things. She can help you with your Akashic records. She is like I said, she's my partner, and we go out and try to help people. Next, you'll hear about Dave Harvey and Thomas Durant. Tommy is a demonologist, and he has so much information. He and Dave is really just one of the most experienced paranormal investigators. You'll find some of their episodes fascinating. They're sort of the first people I always go to when I need help with something. They have referred books. They have just so much. Watch for their episodes to get to know who they are. They help me with paranormal protection. Just terrific. Tommy's wife, Jen. She is one of my Reiki masters. She is one of my Bettys. I think she's, her and I have some sort of old soul lives together. And she is going to be on right away talking a little bit about holistic foods and things you can add to your diet. So we're going to be doing a lot of paranormal, some holistic, some funny stuff, a lot of haunted places, that kind of thing. So that is sort of the cast of characters to watch for. I will be doing my first podcast with each one of those, and I'm sure you'll become familiar as you hear me say, oh, Tommy said to do this, or Dave told me about this. I'm going to be doing a full episode on what was going on in Kira's house, which will match probably the one I do on my other one with her, but there's a lot of interesting information that passed with Tommy and Dave and what was going on. So, we are kind of going to, we're going to be scared, and we're going to study for a higher vibration. That's what I think we should do. Now, I'm already, how far am I in? Look at me, 13 minutes into my own podcast, and I haven't even got to the list of things I wanted to tell you. So, when I do the podcast alone, it'll probably be something that I'm studying or my current obsession. And my current obsession is from last week, which these are pre-taped, so it's a little off, when I was in Ogden, Utah, which is one of my, Wise Guys is not only one of my favorite clubs, but Ogden is just the... let's see, there's a pet cemetery that was the inspiration for Stephen King's Pet Cemetery. There is 25th Street, which is a small block of shops, and every single shop has its own ghost story. And all these shops are linked through underground tunnels, because at the first part of the street is the the Union Station, which is the railroad station where it was everything from soldiers coming back from Vietnam to Prohibition many years ago, where there was all these speakeasies and there was a lot of prostitution and drinking, and Utah used to be a lot of fun. I'm just saying. And it's this sort of one area that is so rich in haunted history. In fact, I did an episode on each of these. If you go see Paranormal Karen on YouTube, I did a comedic episode on each of these. It all ends, all the tunnels and on the street and everything ends at the Ben Lomond Hotel. I'm going to tell you the story about this, and then I'm going to end with the best ghost story ever told about the Houdini Museum in Pennsylvania. So I was there working in Ogden, I think it was a year ago. And while I was there, I was looking at the Egyptian Theater. I was looking at all these little places that had all this haunted history to make my little videos. And I get a call from Sonia, the animal communicator, and she describes a building that is like a block down kitty corner to where I'm staying, and she describes it perfectly. And it's the Ben Lomond, which sort of has like 4 floors that are a regular square, and then behind it in an L shape there is, I believe, 13 floors. Okay? And she said, courage says you are to never ever go into that building, that there is something horrible in that building. Don't go into it. So I didn't that first time I was there. And I started to ask people, I would announce during the show, if anyone has a story about the Ben Lomond, can you please come tell me after the show? Well, I got stories. Boy, did I get stories. I didn't pursue it that time, but this time going back, of course, when someone says, don't go in there, you have to go in there. So I waited until Saturday afternoon and I called the animal communicator to ask my dog if I could go in the building. Because that's how, you see where we're going with this? Why I said you can't be skeptical. I'm going to be talking to my dog through a lot of these, so just go with me. And there's a whole thing here where you'll go, Mel, maybe the dog was right. So she said, well, he says you can go in a little. And before I get to my story, I started reading on the internet all these things about the Ben Lomond. And what I came across is there seems to be 2 or 3 stories that surface that are like, oh goodness, oh my goodness. And these are stories you kind of hear in a lot of hotels. They are about the bride that didn't make it. Either the groom left her, or I believe this one was that the bride drowned in the bathtub. She drowned in room 1102, and right before her wedding, and her son came to get her and gather her things, and he was so distraught that he killed himself in 1101. So make a note there. 1102, we're talking about a dead bride. 1101, son so distraught, kills himself. Okay? That's one of the stories. And I always kind of feel like stories like that are, they're sort of course, they're heartbreaking, but they kind of don't really involve others. You know what I mean? Like that's sort of a ghost that you're like, well, that wouldn't really be any of my business. Why would I see that ghost? That's not anything that's going to attack me. It's just something going on, a sad story. Another one was about a mother who was waiting for her son, who was a soldier from World War II, and she was in room 1106. When he did return, I don't know if they hadn't told her he had passed away or he was dead. So she died in room 1106. The story is she died of a broken heart, or like again, something. Oh, that's such a sad story. So we're looking at rooms 1101, 1102, and 1106. Okay. Now, this hotel was actually, before it was the Ben Lomond, it's made several changes. And even now, it's the Bigelow Apartments, I believe, or the Bigelow Suites and Ben Lomond Hotel. It has been bought and sold quite a few times, names changing. The very first death, I started reading on all these different blogs. I came across one that just had terrific newspaper articles about the deaths that happened there. The very first death that happened was in the 1800s. Was it 1891? Yes. Okay. There were something that people complain about now. All of this on the 11th floor. They complain about phone calls coming from rooms on the 11th floor that have no one in them. They have smells of perfume. They have smoke smells. They have cold spots. They have disembodied voices. People hear doors slamming and even see full-bodied apparitions, okay? So that 11th floor is pretty active. I also saw on a travel site from a review of this hotel, someone that had stayed there said it, they didn't give it a great review, and they said it was very creepy, and they woke up in the middle of the night with someone standing over their bed. And then that person disappeared. And in a travel, like, I don't know if it was it was sort of a travel review. That's a very strange thing that, well, there was a ghost standing over me. So, the place was built actually to become the Ben Lomond in 1927. Before that, it was the Reed Hotel. And here I do have it. It has 13 floors. The Reed Hotel, I believe, started in 1891. And Mrs. William Steele was the first person, the first suicide there. That was in 1891. No, that was, no, I'm sorry. Okay, the first person died of tuberculosis there in 1891. That's the first death they have registered from the hotel. In 1902 was the first suicide where a wife shot herself in the head, which is a very rare, that's an odd death for a woman, or an odd suicide for a woman, especially in 1902. Her husband came home and just found she had shot herself. Not a lot of explanation or anything around that. I believe that really hotels have a lot of suicides in them anyways. That seems more common and something that people don't hear about. I remember when I used to work in Las Vegas on the Strip, the hotels would have all kinds of suicides, and they were sort of like cleaned up and moved on so quickly, and you never read about them in the papers anywhere. I know I stayed in a hotel once in Florida where I was staying on the 3rd floor, and every time I got on the elevator, it went up to the 4th floor. And I kept thinking, it wouldn't let me get off on the 3rd floor. And I finally said to other people, why does a hotel elevator always take you to the 4th floor? And people were like, we don't know what you're talking about. So I went to the front desk and I said, did someone kill themselves on the 4th floor? And the guy behind the desk became furious, and he said, no one killed themselves here, and we don't talk about those things here, and there's nothing wrong with the 4th floor. And it was so obvious that something was wrong that I was like, So I said, okay, I don't mind. Never mind, I didn't ask. And I went back and got on the elevator, which took me to the 4th floor. And I had to go down the stairs again. Later that day, I went back down and asked another lady at the front desk. I said, had someone killed themselves on the 4th floor? And she waited a long time and said, we don't talk about things like that. So I think that's way more common, that people just check into hotels and kill themselves. So enjoy your stay. Now, in 1921, we go to the next death that was in the newspaper. A cook fell 3 stories down the elevator shaft. This is where things start to get very strange with the elevator. Even stories today, and you'll know when I went in there, they talk about this elevator has a mind of its own. It opens and closes on its own. It goes up and down like somebody's operating it when no one's in it. Even with the, even all hours of the night, it works on its own. And this was the first thing they said. The elevator doors opened, and for some reason the elevator wasn't there, and this cook stepped in and dropped 3 stories to his death. In 1929, a man died at the front desk. That was just another recorded death. Now, here's where we get interesting again. Everything is the 11th floor and the elevator. In 1939, two young men got out of a cab and walked up to the bellboy at the front of the hotel, had a little fight with the bellboy. They still don't know what that was about. And they both jumped on the elevator and told the person that was running the elevator to take them to the top floor. And she was like, no, we're not doing it. She tried to get them out in the lobby. They forced their way back on, took the elevator up to, it doesn't say, I'm betting it was the 11th floor, and both of them went to the end of the hallway, opened the window, and one after the other jumped out and killed themselves. Okay? That's just weird enough for any story on alone. Just two guys had to ride up and jumped out the window. They had another teacher that died in there in 1951. She also jumped out a window. In 1976, on October 24th at 2 a.m., they found the hotel clerk had been brutally murdered. A 15-year-old boy came in and stabbed this clerk. So there's so much going on in the history of this hotel it's also why I find it very interesting that during Prohibition, all the tunnels on 25th, that's where they end, at the Ben Lomond. So now the staff is very... they talk about how they hate cleaning the 1101 and 1102. Sometimes guests that stay in 1102, the bath will just start on its own, which is where the bride died in the bathtub. When I asked people to come tell me their stories about the Ben Lomond, the first woman that came up to me said the 11th floor had been totally shut off. There were years where they blocked off that floor, probably because the activity was so crazy, and they just didn't have it open. She said one night they were all out drinking, and a security guard brought them all up there, and they kind of looked around, but it was definitely, they weren't supposed to be there. For whatever reason, this hotel had blocked off a whole floor. That's very interesting. And yet still, the hotel was getting phone calls from inside the room. Talk about the phone call coming from inside the house. So all that is going on. They said some ghost hunters had been up there. I saw a few tapes on the internet, but nothing that I could really see what was going on, or nothing that really stood out. There were some good ghost hunting tapes up there, but they didn't quite have the evidence with this kind of a story. You want something big, something crazy big. So now we get back to my story. So apparently my dog gave me permission to go in there for a little while, is what he said. So I went in, I came around the corner, I went in, and I had my... video camera. I have some video on my phone, and I walked in and there was no one there. And I kind of started to look around, and it had that creepy, heavy feeling of an old hotel. It just, I was like, this feels depressed, is really what it was. It was more kind of dark and depressed, and I was a little apprehensive, especially after being warned by my dog. And the lady came out from behind, and she came to the front desk, and she was lovely. She had said she was very young. She had seen the hotel. She just moved here from Alaska. I don't know if she saw it on the internet or something, and she just had to work there, which is always a weird sign to me, because if you watch all the shows about the horribly haunted houses, that's how they all start out. I had to have this house. This house spoke to me. I love this house. And she started to tell me the stories about the creepy things that were happening there when she was there. And she said they just recently painted all these columns. And she said, and I don't like the paint because underneath all these columns were mirrors. And that immediately made me wonder if somebody knew what they were doing and they were trying to calm down the paranormal activity, at least in the lobby. Because mirrors can very easily be portals, and mirrors facing mirrors can cause chaos and kind of some feng shui. I know one of my favorite radio hosts talked about how at certain locations they had seen things move from one mirror to the other. So mirrors are something you always want to be very careful with. I have had some, I don't partake in too much, I don't want to say witchcraft because that sounds all scary, and I have had some experience with mirrors. I'll put it this way. I had a neighbor that was they just had horrible energy. And months later, I found out the FBI had been watching our apartment for months because these people really were criminals. But they were right up against, we had a wall, we shared a wall. And a friend of mine said, you want to put a mirror facing like backwards on the wall facing them and reflect all their energy and their activity back to them. And that really did sort of minimize the chaos or them bothering me. They were coming over a lot and asking for stuff and real crazy. And that really did minimize the activity that was going on. Also, I own a haunted mirror, which is another story I will play as a comedy piece. But I had a mirror that my dog wouldn't sleep in front of, and one night I had a whole bunch of people over, and a couple of them were mediums, and both of them said, there's a little boy looking at you from the other side of that mirror. So mirrors can be portals, and they can cause a lot of trouble. In fact, I feel like when you talk about reincarnation, I believe that your worst person would be reincarnated as a hotel bathroom mirror. Think about all the horrible things a bathroom mirror in a hotel room has seen. So that would be torture. That's what I don't want to be in my next life. So she starts telling me this, and I already think, okay, that's probably why some of this mirror thing has probably calmed some of the activity in the hotel. Now, as long as I've been reading tarot, and when you start doing paranormal investigating, and you kind of start, what it sort of happens, I believe if I had gone into this hotel 10 years ago, it would have been like, hey, whatever, it's kind of cool, kind of creepy, what's to be afraid of? But after all the experiences that I've had and all the things I've seen, I always feel like when something is that dark in a hotel and I know it's there, it knows I'm there. Okay? I'm not, this is not about special powers or anything like that. I just think there's an awareness. Like when we sometimes investigate people's houses, we go in alone and ask them to leave so that the entity or ghost in the house does not identify with them and then start bothering them all the time. They will identify with us and we won't be there. So it won't start, it sort of cuts off the communication a little bit. So she said, well, the mirrors are still on the columns upstairs. You can go on the second floor. You can go in the wedding ballroom. And so I went to a couple of these places and I looked around, and it really is a very lovely hotel. And I decided to go up to the second floor, and I wasn't even halfway up the stairs where I could hardly breathe. I got up to that second floor, and it was so heavy and felt dark, and I wasn't even up there 3 minutes, and a door opened, and a guy came out of the management or something, and I said hello, and I just went downstairs. He ended up being the general manager, and I met him later downstairs. He just came down to talk to the girl behind the desk, and they were just standing there. And I went around and took a few more pictures, and I was kind of like, I think I'm done here. Just kind of very quickly, I was like, I think it's time to go. I noticed that they had the 11th floor, the lady said, yeah, you can't go up there now. It's a restaurant and it's not open right now. So I thought, good luck with that. There's a restaurant upstairs on the 11th floor. At least there are not rooms there. And then I stood and talked to them at the front desk and heard a couple of their stories, all very interesting. And I said, well, I have to go. And the girl at the front desk said, "But wait, you're not even going to get in and ride the elevator?" And I turned around and looked, and just as she finished that statement, the elevators opened with no one in them. And I thought, no, I'm not going to ride the elevators because they seem ready for me to get on them. And I left. And almost like Stephen King had written this himself, the minute I walk outside, there is a homeless woman, it must have been schizophrenic, screaming nonsensical stuff at me. like I mean steps from the front door. And as I just walked past her, she kept looking at me and she stopped screaming and she just kept going tick, 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 tick. I don't even know what that was. And I'm not even a half a block down. Around the corner comes another guy looking me dead in the eye, just whistling. Not saying hello, not smiling, just whistling. That was creepier than the homeless lady. And then I went for a long walk and I sort of did a little meditation and my own little protection to get that energy off me. But that is my story of the Ben Lomond. There is so much in these old places, but I don't think we'll ever know what that was. I think all these there was something sometimes that starts a darker energy or, a lot of suicides, and that starts to collect a bad energy, or I hate to throw the word demonic around because I think it gets thrown around too much when there's plenty of other things that could have been causing trouble, but there's something in that hotel and it ain't leaving. And so maybe someday I'll have the guts to get on the elevator, but not right now. Not right now. So that was a great weekend in Utah. And before I go, I promised you I would tell you the best ghost story ever. Now, as a comedian, I am a storyteller. And a lot of times I hear people try to tell stories. They go into all kinds of informations and long pauses that make me lose my mind. My friends at the Houdini Hotel in Pennsylvania that I finally got to visit. You can see my Paranormal Karen. It's fabulous. If you get a chance and you're in Scranton, Pennsylvania, look it up. They have two of my friends run it. They own it. They know so much about Houdini. It's fascinating. They do magic shows there, and they're always telling me how haunted the place is. So one day they had a guy in there. I can't remember if he was a ghost hunter or something, because they don't usually have ghost hunters go in there, and they don't host ghost nights. I think this was sort of a somebody that was just maybe one time or something. And as they're talking to them, they hear above them one of those big magic crates. If you work with magicians or you know them, they always have these very large crates. They have all kinds of stuff in them. They're very, very heavy. And above them, from one side of the ceiling to the other, they hear one of these heavy, heavy things being pushed all the way across, the wheels screeching. And the ghost hunter says to my friend, "Can we go look upstairs?" And my friend says, "There is no upstairs." That, ladies and gentlemen, is the best ghost story ever. That means I meet the call is coming from inside the house, and raise you there is no upstairs. That is my favorite ghost story. People always ask me where I get my crystals and beautiful gemstone jewelry, and I tell them I go right to GaiaSpirits.com. Gaia Spirits Gift Shop has everything from crystals to singing bowls, and they also offer readings, Reiki, gift certificates, and home blessing services that fit everyone's budget. My friend Robin Celine has years of experience with crystals, so if you're not sure what you're looking for, she is always right there to help. They even have crystal packages to help with house cleansings and getting rid of some of those pesky ghosts. I get so many compliments on my black tourmaline necklace Robin suggested for grounding, and so far I haven't floated away yet. As a special gift for my listeners, use coupon code ParanormalKaren and receive 10% off your first purchase. Again, use coupon code ParanormalKaren, all one word, GaiaSpirits.com, where I go for all my crystal and gemstone needs. Thanks for listening to my first episode. Hey, if you are in the Portland area, March 8th, I am playing at Harvey's all weekend long through Sunday, 3 shows on Saturday, so you certainly can get into one of those. Also, send me your ghost stories at paranormalkaren@gmail.com, and we will read them on the air. You can follow my YouTube series, Paranormal Karen, there, and, well, you can find everything at paranormalkaren.com or karenrontowski.com. You can book a reading or find out any of my other dates or see about upcoming episodes. Thanks, and whatever you do, don't be normal.